So my presentation, it focuses very much on University of Leicester and is very in keeping with how the HE sector procures. Also, not least the other two universities in Leicestershire, the Montfort and Loughborough. We work very closely together, but also the wider public sector, given that we deem ourselves to be a contracting authority within the public procurement legislation. So I guess the first point to kick off with is it's not just about price. It's very rarely about price. There's a number of elements that we need to take account of when we're running our procurement exercises and awarding a contract. There's the sort of the broadest thing is the price quality split. It's rare that it's all about price or majority price. Indeed, it's often a mix of the two, 50-50, or even slightly more in favour of quality. What I mean by quality is the requirement, the specification, and the extent to which bidders can meet that specification and indeed surpass it. Data protection is a critical element for us. So where there's personal data being processed on behalf of the university, legislation dictates that we need to be very careful around and show great due diligence in terms of understanding how that data is going to be processed. That's played throughout the specification, terms and conditions and questions within the tender. Health and safety, clearly important, particularly for estates-based contracts. Business continuity, so where a service or goods really have a profound effect on how we operate as a university. If that contract fails, our operations are severely dented. We will ask a number of questions in that regard in terms of what the business continuity plans are for the supplier. When were they last tested? What were the results? Let's have a look at all of that. Intellectual property, so we're looking to derive some a product, intellectual property off the back of this, a report pertaining to the university, whatever it might be. We need to be very careful around where that IP, the ownership of that, resides at the end of the contracts, and covering that off. Most contracts that we award are based on university terms and conditions. We endeavour to make that the case. They're included as the basis of requests for quotations and invitations to tender. That's for a number of reasons, not least our terms and conditions cover our risks. They're written by a lawyer acting in our interests. At the same time, trying not to be overly onerous, particularly for small and medium enterprises. Environmental impacts, and that might sort of show itself in many different ways, whether it be around logistics and carbon emissions and trying to be efficient in that fashion, whether it be single-use plastics or getting recyclable content built into the specification for the packaging, for example, all sorts of elements to that, depending on the nature of the contract. Equity, diversity and inclusion. This might relate to both the supplier's policy in that regard and training. It might also relate very particularly to the contracts. For example, if it's a service to be delivered directly to students, for example, does the workforce that's going to be delivering directly that contract to students, does the demographic profile sort of meet and marry with our student profile? Social value could mean a number of things. We'll come on to that a little bit more in a moment. It could be simply internships being offered in relation to the contract for graduates, undergraduates at the university. Modern slavery, so high-risk contracts where there's a potential for there to be modern slavery, human trafficking within the supply chain. So I'm thinking, PPE, workwear, catering contracts. We have a number of high-risk contracts where there's extra due diligence in regards to modern slavery. It's hardwired in all of this in terms of showing these sorts of considerations. So the Procurement Act 2023 that became effective on the 24th of February 2025, so not long ago now, still has us as a university deemed to be caught by all of that. We're a contracting authority. 50% plus of our funding is public funding. Student loans are deemed to be public funding. They are underwritten by the government, so we are caught by that legislation. The legislation is really clear around maximising public benefit, going beyond a little bit the particulars of the contract, trying to get as much good stuff out of that contract as possible for the local area, for the community. It's always been there in public procurement, but it's a little bit more explicit around considering the barriers for small and medium enterprises and making sure they're not unduly high, that they're not sort of, we can take those out, we can limit the extent to which they have an impact as part of the procurement. There's a real need to think about all of that. Find a Tender is the platform for advertising contracts for the whole cycle, the whole procurement life cycle, built into that Find a Tender, that central digital platform that the government has. And payment notices are really being cranked up in terms of what they need to include and the regularity that they are put again onto that central digital platform. So we're displaying the fact that we are paying our suppliers 30 days in arrears to a decent standard, decent rate. The university's own procurement regulations and policies are really clear around, proportionate financial and insurance requirements. So we're not setting a financial standing requirement that is, only the blue chip companies can meet. We need to think about what is the risk here, and therefore what should the financial standard be. Let's try and marry the two up and be proportionate. There's also that need to consider lotting of requirements, so not just having one huge big contract necessarily that is there for the bigger firms to pick up, but also thinking whether there's some sense in breaking it down. One of the senses, one of the benefits being that SMEs can bid for smaller chunks of business contracts. Within the procurement unit, we have a procurement cycle checklist, which again draws out and makes front and centre environmental impact, social value prompts. The same happens and operationalises all of this within our quotation and tender template. So nothing gets missed. The standard questions, which I'll come on to in a moment, that relate to sustainability and social value. We've invested in, on behalf of suppliers, the Net Zero Carbon Supplier Tool and the Social Value Portal. So the Net Zero Carbon Supplier Tool used by over 40 universities. This allows suppliers and indeed non-suppliers at the time to go into that tool and submit their own emissions data, which we can then use in relation to our scope 3, calculating an accurate scope 3 or getting closer to an accurate scope 3 supply chain emissions figure. Where a supplier doesn't have those numbers, it's maybe not mature enough and hasn't the resource to get to that number. There's a questionnaire within that tool that allows the supplier to answer a number of questions, which gives them a calculation, a quantification of their carbon emissions, and furthermore provides them with a carbon reduction plan, which is all very helpful. We put out a reactive cleaning services contract to tender. Price was 40%. Quality delivery to spec was 32.5%. As you can see then, experience 10%, environmental impact 2.5%, beyond some mandatory standards in the specification. Modern slavery, so this is a high risk area in terms of modern slavery, 7.5%. Beyond mandatory requirements as well, is 100k plus contract. So Social Value Portal was deemed to be worthy of use there, and that had a 7.5% weighting as well. Workwear, an even lower price weighting there, 35%. Quality and how that breaks down in terms of sample, stock holding, etc. 55%. Experience, 5%. Environmental impact was a pass-fail with some particular minimum standards, and again another, as I said earlier, high risk area for modern slavery, so a 5% weighting. I mentioned earlier around our templating and how that sort of helps operationalize all these laudable objectives and thoughts about how we should procure in terms of sustainability and social value. And this slide here just gives a bit of a sense of how certain elements and requirements and questions get asked across our suite of templating. So I've used here the request for quotation template for the lower value, £10,000 to £60,000 contracts. The tender pack that we generally use for 60k plus contracts, and then estates tender pack. They can be a bit different. There's a lot going on with estates. They are of a higher order in terms of value generally, and there's a real sweet spot for a lot of those areas I mentioned earlier around health and safety, sustainability, all that sort of stuff that needs to be factored into a tender and ultimately the contract. I've mentioned a few times already the social value portal, and we generally use it for £100,000 plus contracts. As I said earlier, it's used both at the point of tendering, so we can get commitments, quantify commitments from bidders, and then thereafter through the contract management phase, track that delivery as it comes in. We are just at the moment finalising a support tool to be appended to our tender packs that allows bidders to see how they might come good against those commitments. So if they haven't necessarily in the past worked closely with, say, voluntary organisations to be able to have a policy of their employees supporting those type of organisations, which scores well in terms of our social value portal, we can give contacts to certain organisations in the area to allow them to make contact and develop meaningful submissions for the tender. The next few slides just run through those 35 TOMs that we've selected for ourselves as universities. I think at the bottom there you can see the support, expert support for voluntary sector organisations and SMEs. That's one of the 35 TOMs, and as I say, all of these have been quantified in the background in terms of what that means in terms of pounds and pence. I've highlighted in green the ones that are particularly relating to the environment. So in summary, I guess the point again to make, it's worth making the point again, because I think it is, this myth busting is required, that it's not just about price when we are going out and doing a procurement. It can't be. There's lots of other things to be thought about, not least environmental impact and social value. It's important to us. It's hardwired into all of our policy and processes. Just a few tips there. So I mentioned the government's Find a Tender portal. It's worth, if you're not already, going in and registering on that portal as a supplier. I think there's preferencing you can put in there in terms of the sorts of contracts you're interested in. I think potentially the geography of them as well, so you can get alerts when certain tenders go live. You can similarly do the same on our Delta e-tendering system. So not all of our contracts will go on Find a Tender. There won't be a certain threshold where that's required. But where we are putting out an open tender, it'll be on Delta. A vast majority of our recurring contracts are on that contract list, and you can see the expiry dates. So if there's something there that piques your interest, you think that's something that we'd like to compete for, I'm open to people contacting us. We treat speculative calls quite seriously as a procurement team. We make a commitment to get back to those from the category manager and let them know where things are in terms of when we're next going out to bid and what our current arrangements are for a certain type of contract. And then make the most of the support available. So not least what is being produced and is here today, the Greener Future Leicestershire, that net zero common supplier tool. It can be used ahead of becoming a supplier to the university. Those local contacts, as I say, on their way in terms of helping people to work up social value portal submissions, and it could be used more broadly for just social value commitments that you can make as part of pitches and quotations.